What's up guys, it's Liv, and today I'm going to be looking at the Bloody Mary myth. Now Mary, otherwise known as Mary Tudor, was the only surviving child of Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. She reigned from 1553 to 1558, only 5 years, before she died during an outbreak of influenza in London. Now Mary is remembered as one of the least popular, most bloodthirsty monarchs we've ever had in England, mostly due to her very controversial burning of Protestants during her reign. Is there any truth to this myth? Obviously, I don't think so, but let's have a look at the evidence.
Mary Tudor was the most hated queen in British history. During her 5-year reign, she threw all England into chaos. Mary beheaded traitors, murdered heretics, and had pregnant women burnt to death in the name of her religious fanaticism. The entire nation...
portrayed as weak, hysterical, pathetic. There is some basis in fact for this myth, because Mary did suffer from ill health throughout her whole life. It started in her childhood through a period of extreme stress, when she was said to develop stomach cramps and very severe headaches. It worsened in 1536 when her mother died. It was then that Mary developed depression, what the Tudors called a melancholy, which would stay with her for the rest of her life. Her health worsened when she came to the throne. Historians have guessed she suffered from either uterine cancer or ovarian cysts, partly because of the 2 phantom pregnancies she suffered while she was queen.
My husband is gone. They have poisoned my child. They say it is a tumour. Oh.
Madam, you are not well.
They say this cancer will make you queen, but they are
wrong. Mary didn't have an easy childhood. She was very close to her mother, Catherine of Aragon, and practiced the Catholic faith like her. From about the time that Mary was 9, her father, Henry, began trying to annul his marriage to Catherine. From the time she was 17, Mary was no longer allowed to speak to or see her mother. This same year, 1533, Henry remarried Anne Boleyn, declared his marriage to Catherine null and void, which made Mary a bastard. Mary was forced to become a lady-in-waiting to her infant half-sister, the baby Elizabeth. This was a move designed to humiliate her. Mary never saw her mother again. She died 3 years later. After Anne Boleyn had been executed in 1536, Mary hoped she might be allowed to come back to court. But it was made clear to her by Henry VIII's councillors she would have to recognise him as the head of the Church of England and to agree that he had never truly been married to her mother. Now Mary was passionately devoted not only to the Catholic Church, but also to the memory of her mother, and she refused. The Duke of Norfolk responded by telling her if she was his daughter, he would beat her in the head so hard it looked like a baked apple. Nice stuff. When Mary's brother Edward became king when he was 9 years old, the religion of England became even more Protestant. However, Mary continued to practice her Catholic faith, even though the council wrote to her and asked that she at least not go to Mass in public. There was little they could do to stop Mary. At this point, she was a mature woman in her late 20s, and Henry had left her so many lands and such a large income in his will. She was one of the wealthiest women in England now, certainly one of the most influential. However, In 1553, when Edward was on his deathbed, he named a different heir. He appointed Lady Jane Grey, who was a distant cousin of Edward, Elizabeth and Mary, as his heir, and she was quickly married to the son of the Duke of Northumberland, who happened to be Edward's closest advisor. Northumberland wrote to Mary asking her to come to London to try and trap her, but Mary was warned beforehand of the plot, and she fled to her estate in Kenninghall. She arrived there on the 8th of July, and immediately began to send out thousands and thousands of letters to all her supporters. She proclaimed herself queen and asked them to come with a great force to meet her and support her. On the 10th of July, Jane was proclaimed queen in London. Now it's easy to look back and underestimate how strong Jane's position was. But she had the majority of the important nobles in the country on her side. She possessed the capital, and the head of her faction was the Duke of Northumberland, who was an experienced military commander. On the other hand, Mary's position was not looking that stable. The Spanish ambassador wrote to the emperor saying, "All the forces in the country are in the Duke's hands, and my lady has no hope of raising enough men to face him." But she did. Because Mary had the loyalty of the important men in East Anglia. That was where the majority of the lands Henry VIII had left her were, and she was the most powerful landowner in that region. Mary also had the loyalty of the Catholic believers, which at that point was still quite a large number. By the 12th, she had enough men to move her growing army to her fortified castle, Framlingham, in Sussex. Tide seemed to be turning in Mary's favour, and when a man in her household managed to persuade 5 royal ships to desert Jane's cause and defect to Mary's, men started deserting Northumberland's army and going to Mary instead. On the 19th of July, Jane was thrown in the Tower of London, and Mary was proclaimed queen. Mary showed the same bravery and decisiveness when in the first year of her reign, 1554, there was a rebellion against her rule. A Protestant noble who had lands in Kent, Thomas Wyatt, raised the county, a force of about 3,000 men, and marched on London with them, supposedly because they were angry that Mary planned to marry the Catholic King of Spain, Philip. Now, some of the London militia were dispatched to deal with this force, but instead they joined the rebels, making it in total an army of about 4,000. At this point, the situation was beginning to look quite bad. Mary and her council even sent a messenger to Wyatt, asking what his terms were. But he replied that they would need to surrender the Tower of London to him and the Queen into his care, which Mary was obviously not keen to do. There's evidence in contemporary chronicles that some of Mary's councillors were beginning to panic. Some of them wore armour underneath their robes. But Mary did not panic. She went to the Guildhall in London and made a famous speech to the crowds, which apparently roused them to defend the city of London against Wyatt's rebellion, which was defeated. So from the 3 examples that we have looked at, Mary doesn't come across as weak and cowardly. Actually, the opposite. She seems brave, decisive, and stubborn. She sticks by her principles in situations where almost no one else does or believes that she can.
Philip, the Prince of Spain, son of Charles the Emperor. The portrait is by a Signor Titian. Oh, it's a good picture. Yes. You married in the first flush of your youth. You were lucky. Now you must go. I have ambassadors to see.
As a child, at least, we know that this isn't true. Mary's mother, Catherine of Aragon, was very popular, especially with the Londoners, and there was huge anger when she was put aside for Anne Boleyn. Mary probably benefited from her mother's popularity. Remember when Henry VIII told the judges he wanted Mary convicted of heresy, and they were worried about popular outrage? From this we can reasonably infer that Mary was popular among the people when she was a young princess. Even into adulthood, into her reign, Mary managed to raise armies twice, during the Jane Dudley coup and second in the Wyatt Rebellion. Makes it clear that even if she wasn't popular, she was at the very least not unpopular. But then, Mary made the first mistake of her queenship. She married Philip, the King of Spain and the son of the Habsburg Emperor, Charles V. Now this was a mistake because Mary's English subjects at the time were not fans of the Spanish. The Chronicle of Queen Jane and Queen Mary discusses Wyatt's rebellion, and it mentions a crowd being whipped up through a speech that threatens a Spanish invasion. The speaker reportedly says, if the Spanish arrived, they would spoil our lands and goods, ravish our wives in front of our faces, despoil our daughters in our presence. This hatred was linked to a fear that England would become absorbed into the Habsburg Empire. Now all this must have been really frustrating for Mary, because politically, marrying Philip was a really good match. Not only was he the King of Spain, an heir to a large empire, but the marriage treaty really favoured the English. It really constrained Philip's powers as King of England. It spelt out that Philip or his son would never inherit England, and it said that England could not be pulled into Spain's war with France. Even more, the treaty said that if Mary and Philip managed to conceive a son, he would inherit the Netherlands. When you add on to that the fact that Philip was 10 years younger than Mary, reportedly quite good looking, that's pretty much the ideal Tudor husband. Despite being King of England though, Philip wasn't very present. He and Mary married in 1554, but he went back to Spain the next year. The only time he returned was to ask for Mary's help in his war against France. Now, the Privy Council refused. It's difficult to know what would have happened otherwise, but soon after, Thomas Stafford invaded England with French funds and French help and managed to seize Scarborough Castle. This was an attempt to kick Mary off the throne, and he says he was rescuing England from a nation of naughty Spaniards. So, in 1557, Mary proclaimed war on the French. She sent a herald to the French king, Henry, but after the herald declared war, Henry immediately cut him off. He said he didn't need to listen to the rest of the message because it was sent by a woman. Consider how I stand when a woman sends to me for war, he said. But it was a difficult war against France. Philip especially was very short of money and kept writing to Mary to ask her to send him more funds. Now the first time this happened, Mary did call together a parliament to raise money for the war. But the second time, the Privy Council wrote back refusing further help. That same year, Calais was lost to the French, never to be taken back by the English, their last outpost in France. And Mary died soon after.
It takes. I will burn however many heretics I have to.
Now, it's undeniable that she persecuted Protestants. In her 5-year reign, Mary burned between 270 to 280 heretics. That's about 55 a year. To a modern audience, that sounds horrific. But we need to consider these things in their context. Mary didn't invent the punishment of burning for heresy. It was the common punishment for that offence, used throughout Europe. If we have a look at what her contemporary monarchs were doing, her husband Philip, back in Spain, was the head of the Spanish Inquisition, which regularly executed heretics. When a Protestant rebellion broke out in Habsburg-owned Netherlands, Philip put it down so brutally, he killed over 10,000 of his subjects. Meanwhile, in France, where Henry II was king, not only did he continue the repression of Protestants that his father started, he also found a way to do it more efficiently, setting up a special court called the Fiery Chamber, specifically for persecuting Protestants. And let's not forget Henry VIII, Mary's father. Historians can't agree on a number for how many he killed during his reign. Some think it's as high as 72,000, others think 50,000 is more accurate. Either way, if we examine it with the contemporary practices, Mary's body count doesn't look that high. It's a similar story for Mary's political opponents. It's true, during her reign she executed her cousin, Jane Dudley, and put her sister Elizabeth in the Tower. However, Mary spared Jane after her initial coup because of her age and her innocence. She was only executed after her father was involved in the planning of Wyatt's rebellion. It's the same story for Elizabeth, who was only imprisoned in the Tower after Wyatt and his followers tried to make her queen, and she was implicated in the planning of the rebellion. Now, executing and imprisoning political opponents was pretty normal for Tudor standards. Edward, even though he was only 9 when he became king, executed both his uncles on his mother's side. Elizabeth notoriously beheaded Mary, Queen of Scots, her distant cousin, but also threw another of her cousins, Catherine, Jane Dudley's sister, in the Tower for 7 years for marrying without her consent, where she would die. So again, if we consider Mary against her contemporary rulers, she doesn't look too different from them. She actually was criticised by her councillors and the Spanish ambassador for being too merciful. So if none of this is based in fact, why does the myth exist? First of all, let's talk religion. Mary was obviously a Catholic. After her death, Elizabeth reversed the religion back to the Protestant Church of England her father had set up. And every monarch after Elizabeth has followed this religion, including our current queen, Elizabeth II, except one. James II converted to Catholicism. He was only on the throne for 3 years until the English members of Parliament in his country invited the Dutch Prince William of Orange to invade England and take his throne. Until 2013, any heir to the throne who even married a Catholic would be kicked out of the succession. That is some real legal prejudice. Obviously, Mary's Catholicism has been a huge part of why she's been so vilified. Her burning of heretics has been magnified and taken out of its historical context. On the other hand, Edward and Elizabeth have similar actions have been whitewashed, or even celebrated. Right after Mary's death, the Protestant author John Foxe published his book Acts and Monuments, a history of Protestant martyrs, and in it he included woodcuts showing really graphic torture and burning of heretics. In the first edition, 30 out of 57 woodcuts showed executions from Mary's reign. So this was an account which was really personally biased against Mary. Fox's account was then in turn used by Holinshed in his chronicles. He purposely wanted to show Mary's reign as being opposite of Elizabeth's. And Holinshed's chronicle was in turn used by many Elizabethan and Stuart playwrights, including Shakespeare. And it's also, as well as John Fox's book, used as a source by historians today. So a lot of the sources we have from the period right after Mary's death are incredibly biased against her. But if we examine the term Bloody Mary, it wasn't actually commonly used until after 1673. This was the same year that James, heir to the throne, converted to Catholicism, and the reaction was immediate. In 1674, an anonymous pamphleteer referred to Bloody Mary, called her a tyrant. The same year, Whig propagandist Elkanah Settle claimed that if James came to the throne, there would be a bloody persecution as bloody or bloodier than Mary's. Remember, this is the same James that, when he became king, was deposed in favour of William of Orange, a Protestant prince. So the myth of Bloody Mary was created by Protestants in the 1670s to whip up opposition against James. Let's talk about gender. Mary was obviously a woman, and there had never been a reigning queen in England up until now. Mary was the first to do it. She obviously faced a lot of prejudice in her lifetime, and her legacy has been affected by the same prejudices. If we think about the criticisms applied to Mary, her gender is often wrapped up in these negative accusations. How is she described? Irrational, emotional, dependent, hysterical, whereas Elizabeth is often presented as in a much more masculine way. Her lack of marriage is really emphasised, and there's the famous speech where she says that she has the body of a woman but the heart of a man. These prejudices have been carried down throughout historians' opinions of Mary. So the famous Tudor historian Professor Elton claimed that Mary was rather stupid and devoid of political skill. He claimed she was a Catholic because the Mass gave her emotional satisfaction, and that she only married Philip because of her deep feelings of wanting to be connected to her mother's side of the family. You know, never mind the fact that he was the King of Spain and heir to a huge empire. Up until now, this has pretty much been the historical opinion of Mary. Although recently there has been a shift. More female historians have been reinterpreting Mary, emphasising her bravery and her skill. An example is a 1990 essay by Elizabeth Russell. She claims that Mary invented the conception of her own weakness to help her politically. So when writing to the Pope or the Habsburgs, she would essentially say, "Oh, all my councillors are being really mean to me, and my bishops are being really mean, I just can't do anything right now." And then they would have to give her a better deal, or give her a pass, because they were used to thinking of women as incapable and weak. So we need to bear this in mind when we think about the criticisms of Mary. Almost no one calls Henry VIII emotional when he, divorced one wife, broke with the Catholic Church, and beheaded his next wife, all because he wanted a son. But when Mary gets upset because she can't conceive a male heir, it's because she's hysterical. I know we all love Elizabeth. We all love the Virgin Queen. I'll say this for her. She was a clever woman. She managed to take credit for a lot of Mary's achievements. So number one, presentation. It was very important the way a monarch presented themselves, especially for a woman. How do you present power? By remaining feminine. This had never been done before in England. So Mary had to make up a lot of this herself, and Elizabeth meticulously followed her example. She pretty much nicked Mary's motto word for word, "Truth, the daughter of time," and applied it to herself. On Mary's pre-coronation procession into London, and she showed herself to the people, she wore white cloth of gold and her hair loose around her shoulders. Elizabeth copied her outfit down to the hairdo. In a similar vein, in her famous coronation portrait, Elizabeth is literally wearing Mary's clothes. Another ritual Mary revived was when the monarch would go out and touch people with scrofula and heal them with their sacred touch. So Mary performed this ritual with her people, and when Elizabeth came to the throne, she did as well. So Elizabeth recycled a lot of the ways that Mary presented her power and used them herself. Another, probably one of Mary's most important achievements, which we don't talk about much because it's quite boring, is her financial reforms. She reformed the coinage. During the reigns of Henry VIII and Edward VI, it had been debased. The amount of gold or silver in the coins had been reduced to raise the king's money for their war with France. Now, throughout Mary's whole reign, she planned to recall all the faulty coinage in and reissue new coins of the correct weight. But these plans were only implemented after her death. Secondly, Mary also created a new book of rates, essentially the tax on the export of cloth. She made it more sensible after decades of inflation when it hadn't been changed. But this was only implemented in May 1558, right before Mary's death. So the crown only saw the benefit after Mary had died. Elizabeth reaped the financial rewards. So there's no point pretending that Mary was the perfect queen. She wasn't. She made several mistakes. Her marriage to Philip, for one, was unpopular, to say the least, with the English. And her involvement in the war with France just proved to her enemies that she was completely controlled by her husband, and the loss of Calais was used against her, not just for the rest of her life, which was quite short after that, but all throughout history. The myth of Bloody Mary, a really cruel, unpopular, weak tyrant, is false. Mary was just as vicious as any of her contemporary monarchs, and she was more merciful than most. Her good qualities, her achievements like her financial reforms, her generosity to the church, have all been ignored. And qualities like real bravery and her stubbornness in sticking to her principles, even as a young child, have been uncelebrated and ignored. What we should consider is, had Mary and Philip produced a son that had inherited the Netherlands, and had the monarchs in England all been Catholic since then, would we talk about Mary in the same way? I don't think so.